Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Gittin Daf Hey, and we're starting 4 lines from the bottom on Dalet Amud Beis. We'll do a quick chazara because all of these blot require the same nucleus of information, and that is that our Mishnah teaches that when a husband sends a get from outside of Eretz Yisrael to inside of Eretz Yisrael, there's a specific rule that the shaliach, the person sending the get, has to say b'fanai nechtav u'b'fanai nechtam, that this get was written in front of me and this get was signed in front of me. Rabbah is of the opinion that the reason why we have this requirement is to remove any concern about the lishma component, to make sure that this get was written specifically for this woman. And Rava was of the opinion that our primary concern is not about lishma, but rather about the ability to verify signatures, to be Mekayim the shtar. So we're going to be seeing a host of questions over the course of the blot today about this issue. We'll be stopping. We're going to go pretty far. We're going to be stopping about a quarter of the way down on Vav Amud Aleph at the 2 dots. And then tomorrow I'll post and record a shiur. The Gemara quotes a Mishnah from later on. The Gemara on the bottom of Dalet Amud Beis says, Tanan, maybe get me Medina Sayah. Let's say that a husband sends a get from France to Yerushalayim, and he isn't able to say the phrase. We'll see what this means after we analyze this. If there were witnesses that watched him give her the get, even though he couldn't say the sentence, then that will be considered sufficient. So says the Gemara, what kind of issue did this person have that he couldn't say b'fanai nechtam? What was his physical limitation? What does it mean that he wasn't able to say b'fanai nechtam? Ilema, turning to the top of Hamad Aleph, if you want to say that he was a cheresh, he was a person who wasn't able to speak, he was a mute. Cheresh bar isuye gitahu. A cheresh can't be a person who is able to send a get. That's for sure not. He can't be the shliach. Why not? Because v'atznan hakol ksherim l'havias a get chutz michereshot of a katan. Out of the gates, a cheresh is excluded from being a shliach for a get. So when our Mishnah on the bottom of Dalet Amud Beis says that a husband sent a get from France to Yerushalayim and he was not able to say b'fanai nechtam, it can't be that he was a mute. That's impossible. So the Gemara on Hamad Aleph 3 lines down says, what must have been going on in this Mishnah? It must be the shliach got the get from the husband under good circumstances, and then he had a medical issue, a stroke, whatever, and then he couldn't say b'fanai nechtam. So that's our Mishnah with our understanding of the Mishnah. So let's review. What does our Mishnah say? That if the husband gives the get in France to the shliach, and as he's traveling, a medical issue comes about, and he delivers it without being able to speak, but he delivers it with Eidim, good to go. So says the Gemara on Hamad Aleph 6 lines down, the Rava Nicha. This works out fine and good according to Rava, who's really concerned about Kiyum Hashtar, about the capacity to verify witnesses. No problem. Why? Because he gave over the get in front of 2 witnesses. So even though he wasn't able to do the classical and ideal approach of saying b'fanai nechtam, fine, but at least we were able to verify the document. But l'Rabba kasha. But this Mishnah, and the way we understood this Mishnah according to Rabbi Yosef, this Mishnah does not work for Rabbah, because where was the get written? In France. It was written in Chutz La'aretz, in Medina Sayah. So that's nice that you brought 2 witnesses to say that it was that doesn't help Rabbah. So the Gemara says that maybe that's a kasha on Rabbah. And the Gemara says, don't worry about it. What was really going on in this Mishnah? La'achar shalamdu. La'achar shalamdu means that in Chutz La'aretz, they finally put up those memos all over the place. Everybody knew. What do they call those things in Yerushalayim, the pieces of paper? What was it called? Pashkevilan. So they finally put up, by the way, everybody, FYI, get needs to be lishma. So it says the Gemara, achar shalamdu means now everyone in Chutz La'aretz knows about lishma. So Rabbah's concern in this Mishnah was no longer a concern. All is fine and good. So says the Gemara, if it's true that it's achar shalamdu after everyone in Chutz La'aretz knows, if everybody knows that a get needs to be lishma, then even yachol nami, even if a person is able to say b'fanai nechtam and he doesn't, it should still be fine. Why should it still be fine? Because what was our concern about Medinas Hayam is that they weren't B'nai Torah and they didn't know. So says the Gemara, if they already know, then they know. No need to say B'fanai Nechtam, B'fanai Nechtam. So the Gemara says you can't argue that way because Gzeira, we have a rabbinic injunction, Shema Yachzer Davar L'Kil Kulo. We're concerned that perhaps the next generation will forget. We have witnessed with our own two eyes, everyone in this room, Yeridas Hadoros and Chuvas Hadoros. We've seen it in both directions. We were just talking about this. My mother just finished sitting Shiva for her brother, my Uncle Alan, who passed away. My Uncle Alan is a Baal Tshuva. My nephew Isaac is the Rav of a Shul in Hewlett. 2 generations ago, that was impossible. Both of my parents are Baalei Tshuva. Myself, Howard, my sister, everybody. We're from Shomer Shabbos. Tell me, we learn Torah. We're B'nai Torah. That's impossible. It should be impossible. The Gemara is saying if things happen, things shift in both directions. So there's a rabbinic injunction that Shema Yachzer Davar L'Kil Kulo. Even though right now in Chutz La'aretz it's a Davar Yadua that a get has to be Lishma, we're concerned now. Now we're concerned it may not last forever. So it says the Gemara, Ihachi, if you're concerned that they may forget again, then even in a case of Eino Yachol, then why in our Mishnah would we ever be lenient? If we're always concerned about the generations turning again and then they're going to forget that that they're going to forget the requirement of lishma by a get, then we should never be mekel. So says the Gemara, what was our case? Our case was a case of pikeach v'nischaresh, and that is a milsa de lo shchicha. When you have a person who starts out their shlichus healthy, and they end up too ill to speak, they can't even say the phrase b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam. That is a statistical anomaly. That is extremely rare. And in cases of statistical anomalies, we don't have rabbinic injunctions. We don't make rabbinic laws around completely rare scenarios. Umilsa de lo shchicha lo gazur barabanon. And that's how we understand our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. If this case of a guy who was a pikeach and then he became ill is so rare, and therefore there's no rabbinic injunction, and therefore even though he can't say b'fanai nechtam but b'fanai nechtam, the get's kosher because he gave it in front of Eidim. If that's true, so says the Gemara, I know another scenario that's extremely rare, but we don't have the reprieve and we do have a rabbinic injunction. What's that case? This is an oddball case. The isha de lo shchicha, a woman bringing her own get. How does that work? Once she receives her get, she should be divorced. How does she function as a shlicha for her own get? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi is about 12 lines down. Dibur hamaschil v'ha'isha de lo shlicha. Shetehehi atzma mevia esgita b'torah shlichus. She can bring her own get. So her husband Ruvain says to Rachel, I'm divorcing you. Here's your get. But shelo tiskaresh bo ad shetagia lebezdin ploni. But this document is not effective until you get to the Bezdin in Yerushalayim. You can hold it all you want. You're not divorced until you get to Bezdin in Yerushalayim. So she functions as a shlicha, for her own divorce. It says the Gemara, what do we know about this halacha, about a woman being a shlicha for herself? It's none, quarter of the way down. Hayisha atzma mevia gita. A woman can bring her own get. Ubilvad shetzricha lomar b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam. So Ruvain in France hands a get to Rachel and says, when you get to the Bezdin in Yerushalayim, you're going to be divorced. So Rachel functions as a shlicha for her own divorce. She takes the shtar, she takes the get, she gets on a boat, travels to Yerushalayim, goes into Bezdin, hands Bezdin the shtar and says, B'fanai nechtam, b'fanai nechtam. This is my own get, and she can function as a get. She can function as a shliach. But according to the fact that we normally say that the oddball case is that milsa de lo shchiach, you don't have to say b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam. So why is it that in this case we had to say b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam? The case of pikeach v'nischaresh, we said that he got away without saying it. Here, the case of isha mevia gita, she does have to say b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam. So the Gemara says, about a quarter of the way down on Hayam and Aleph, you're right in concept. However, shelo tachlok b'shlichus. We don't ever want to make a distinction in shlichim. Everyone should have the same rule. Even though you're right that a woman in theory should be removed from her requirement to say b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam, because it's a case of milsa de lo shlicha, it doesn't matter. When it comes to shlichus, we're pretty makbid and we try to keep things even. So once you break a rule once, then it gets very confusing what all the minutiae of rules are. So the rule is just a blanket rule. Every shliach or shlicha, whoever they are, they're obligated to say b'fanei nechta v'b'fanei nechta. The Gemara says, Yihachi, if that's true, then ba'al nami. Then a husband, if he were to function as a shliach for a get that he wrote, he should also have to say b'fanei nechta v'b'fanei nechta. Allah Tanya, why then do we have a brisa that says, Hu atzmo shehebi gito ein sarach lomar b'fanei nechta v'b'fanei nechta? If you're saying that there's a blanket rule that every time a shliach brings a get in b'tor shlichus that they have to say b'fanei nechta v'b'fanei nechta, and even a woman in a case of milsa de lo shlicha has to do that. Okay, but then why does the brisa say that a husband does not have to say b'fanei nechta v'b'fanei nechta? Blanket rule or not? Pick one. So if you're saying it's a blanket rule, the husband should be included in that blanket rule. So says the Gemara, you're right that the husband is an exception, but the exception is so it's so unique that it doesn't apply. The blanket rule doesn't apply. Why not? Because time of my amur rabbanon sarach lomar b'fanei nechta v'b'fanei nechta. What was the fundamental reason in Chazal as to why our Mishnah on Daf Beis and Gittin said that the shliach has to say b'fanei nechta v'b'fanei nechta? Because dilma asi baal me'arer upasile. One of the things that we were concerned about is that a husband is going to show up and say, no, the get is puzzle. But if he's the shliach, we don't have to worry about that. But hashta min kad naki labiyade, because since he's the one who's holding the star in his hand, he's functioning as the shliach. The husband, of course, he wants this to be a real get. What do you think? He got on the boat from France to Jerusalem just for kicks? He wanted to divorce her. So there we don't have to worry about that. And in such a case, if he's the shliach, there's no way he's going to create an error. And therefore, the way things play out is like this. Really, there is a blanket rule. Any shliach, male or female, it doesn't matter, has to say b'fanei nechta v'b'fanei nechta. There's one singular exception, and that is when a husband functions as a shliach, he does not have to say b'fanei nechta v'b'fanei nechta, because the fundamental concern that a husband is going to try and ruin the get doesn't apply when he himself is the shliach. Pashut, he wants the get to be effective. He's the shliach. He wrote it, and he's the shliach. Of course, he wants it to work. So that's question number one for the day and answer number one. Here's question number two. These are in a very similar vein. We'll see repeated Shakla Bataria in this next section. We're a third of the way down on Hamad Aleph Tashma. The Bamine Shmuel mi Rav Huna. This is not in the Tanoim. Usually Tashma indicates Tanoim. Here we see that that's not true. It's not a perfect rule, the Tashma rule. So sometimes when we see Tashma, we just have to prep ourselves. Are we looking at Tanoim or Amoraim? So this was a question that Shmuel asked Rav Huna. Shnayim shehiviu get me Medina Sayyam. Two people are appointed to be a shliach, and they come from France to Yerushalayim. Tzrichin sheyomru b'fanenu nechtav u'v'fanenu nechtav o ein utzar o ein tzrichin. Do we say that when there are two shlichim that they have to say the phrase of b'fanei nechtav u'v'fanei nechtav, or in the plural b'fanenu nechtav u'v'fanenu nechtav, or do they not have to say that? So what was the answer of Rav Huna? Amar le, Rav Huna says back to Shmuel, ein tzrichin. They do not need to say anything. Why not? Because the Gemara gives an excellent svara. Amar le, uma ilu, excuse me. Why doesn't this pair of shlichim have to say b'fanenu nechta b'fanenu nechta? Because uma ilu yomru b'fanenu girsha milo mehemne. Because they're edim. It's a pair of edim. Anything they say will be believed. They can say she's divorced. They can say she's married. They can say anything and they'll be believed. Therefore, this classical formulaic approach of b'fanei nechtam is not really relevant. And that's the end of the brisa. And that then, or it's not really a brisa, it's the end of the memra, but that poses a question for us. L'Rava nicha, but l'Rabba kasha. According to Rava, I understand this brisa perfectly well. Why? Because we had two Eidim come in, they can verify the authenticity of the shtar. But l'Rabba, who says our concern is about lishma, this brisa is a kasha because it doesn't solve for lishma. All we're saying is that two shlichim came. That doesn't solve for lishma. All it does is tell me that the shtar has two Eidim on it. So therefore, the Gemara says, as we saw earlier, Hacha b'maya askinon. How would we understand this dialogue between Shmuel and Rav Huna that we don't require to say b'fanenu nechta b'fanenu nechta matu shlichim? It must be la'achar shalamdu. The only way it works, according to Rabbah, who's concerned about lishma, is that it must be that this question and answer was asked at a time when the people living in Chutz La'aretz did know about lishma. If that's true, chad nami, then it should also be the case that even one person should not have to say b'fanai nechtam u'b'fanai nechtam because they know about lishma. Says the Gemara, no, we can't rely on that because perhaps it is the case. Perhaps it is the case that the generations will forget, and that's not a good enough rule. So one person's insufficient. So says the Gemara, Ihachi beitrei nami. Maybe we should say that if there are two people, then we should have no concerns at all. Says the Gemara, beitrei de maisu gita milsa de lo shchicha. Two people bringing a get is very uncommon. Milsa de lo shchicha lo gazur barabanan. And in those cases, we have no rabbinic conjunctions. So now the Gemara is going to say the same exact shakla b'tarya, so I'll say it quickly. Va'isha de lo shchicha, we have a case of a woman which is uncommon where she brings her own get. That's not what did the Mishnah say about her. But why would a woman have to say b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam if there's no gzera in cases that are uncommon? Just like the case of the two edim, the two shlichim coming is uncommon. It's also uncommon for a woman to be her own shlich. So why does she have to say b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam? Says the Gemara, because lo plug rabbanan, we want it to be shelo tachlok b'shlichus. Everybody should be saying b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam as a matter of principle. Says the Gemara, ihachi, if that's true, balnami, I would have said the same thing if a husband functions as a shliach, that he should have to say b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam. But we know that that's not true because Allah matanya. Why does the Brisa say 3/4 of the way down? Hu atzmo shevi gito eno tzarich lomar b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam. If a husband brings as the shliach, he brings a document, he brings a get to his wife, he does not say b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam. A moment ago, you wanted to say that it's a perfect rule, that everybody says, all shlichim have to say b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam. The Gemara says, no, the case of the husband is a unique categorical anomaly that's not like the other cases. Why not? Because what was the reason why the Chachamim instituted the saying of this phrase? Because Dilma asi bal me'ar urupasile. They were afraid that a husband might ruin the get. But in this case, hashta minkat naki lebiyade, because the husband was the one who was carrying the get as the shlech, we're not worried about him ruining the get. And therefore, says the Gemara, he's going to ruin his own get. It makes no sense. He's the shlech. So therefore, as mentioned before, same conclusion, not a problem for Rabbah. Really, the people in Chutz La'aretz are better trained now. The Pashki Bilin are up. Everybody knows it. Get has to be lishma. And therefore, we are all fine and good. Now let's ask question number 3. 2 lines before the wide lines, 8 lines or so before the bottom of the page on Hayam and Aleph. The Gemara says, Tashma, hamebi get me Medina Sayam. Let's say that a get is brought from France to Jerusalem, Benasnula, and he gave it to her. But velo amar la b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam. But he forgot. He totally swung and missed on his own shlichus. He had no idea what he was doing. Says the Gemara, if he can verify the signatures, it's kosher. V'im lav pasal. So the Gemara says, Have, when we analyze this, lo hutzer chulomar b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam lahachmir aleha ela lahakel aleha. What we see from here is that really the institution of b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam was to protect a woman. It was only meant to help her. It wasn't meant to make her life more difficult. How do we know? Because even though this guy didn't say b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam, because we were able to verify the signature, so the divorce works. So therefore, we see that b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam is basically a protective measure in her corner. It's meant to protect her to be able to get divorced when it's so demanded, and therefore it should only be used in cases of leniency. Now, this only works the Rava Nicha and the Rava Kasha, same as before. This Mishnah as well, is this a Mishnah? I think it's a Brisa. It's a Tosefta, it's neither. This is a Tosefta. Here, the Tosefta says that as long as Adim's signatures can be verified, so therefore all is fine and good according to Rava. But according to Rava, what do we do with Rava? After all, Rava is worried about Lishma, and we haven't solved for that problem. 3 times the charm. It must be that this Brisa is talking about a case. This Tosefta is talking about a case where after people in Chutz La'aretz know about the din of Lishma, and therefore Rabba's answer works. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. You said previously on the page that we're concerned about people forgetting. Says the Gemara, you're right. What are we really dealing with over here? Kishenises. We're dealing with a case over here where the get was given without b'fanai nechtam b'fanai nechtam, and she got married. Now what? If the divorce was valid, good to go. If the divorce was not valid and she has a baby, the baby's a mamzer. That's a very big problem. So in this case, they said b'fanai nechtam v'b'fanai nechtam, and they verified. The cases where they did not say b'fanai nechtam v'b'fanai nechtam, they verified the edim, and then she got married. So says the Gemara, if what you're saying as to why this Mishnah works is because Shani says because she got married, and we don't want to ruin her marriage now that she's married, fine, that's fine. But if that's true, then I have a kasha. The Gemara says, Yihachi, then have that which we said of lo hutzer chalomar b'fanai nechtam v'b'fanai nechtam lahachmir, that's really not right. The reason why this Mishnah works, why the Tosefta works, isn't because b'fanai nechtam is always a kula. It's because kshenises mishum denisesu. So therefore, the Gemara says, here's how you should appropriately understand this Tosefta. 2 lines from the bottom. Hachi kamar. You might say we should be strict on her, and Vilifka, she should be removed from this marriage. Remember the case scenario: this woman received a get. The shliach forgot to say b'fanai nechtam, but they did verify the edim, and we said that she's halachically divorced. And the Gemara says you might have thought that maybe we should be makbid v'lifka, she should get divorced. So there, the Gemara says no, that's not correct. There we would say we're going to be lenient on her. And says the Gemara on the top of the Amud Beis, time of Mai, what is the whole institution after all? For why we have b'fanai nechtam as dilma asi bal me'arer upasele, but hashta bal kalo me'arer. The husband said nothing, and this woman managed to get married to another man in the meantime. And if that's true, we're going to ruin it for her. So says the Gemara, because the husband didn't say anything over the many months after the document was given, even though no b'fanai nechtam was said. She held the shtar, no comment was ever made. She waited a couple of months and she got married to a new guy. She was married to Reuven, now she's married to Chaim. So then we see the husband didn't complain. It must therefore be that the divorce actually worked. Yesterday on Shabbos, we had a discussion about whether or not the machlokas of Rabba and Rava was rooted in the Tanoim. We tried twice and failed to make a proper comparison between the machlokas Rabba and Rava about b'fanai nechtam and the Tanoim. We're going to try now from other earlier Amoraim. And says the Gemara on Hamid Beis, 3 lines from the bottom, but plukta to Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Really, there's a machlokas Amoraim. Chad Amar, perhaps we can say that one of them is of the opinion, like the concern of Rabbah, that the reason why we have to say b'fanai nechtam is because of concerns that the document wasn't written specifically for this woman. V'chad Amar, another shita, either Rabbi Yochanan or Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, was because we have no way to verify the document. So obviously the Gemara is recommending that maybe Rabbah and Rava align with Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. And Tistayim, the Gemara says perhaps that we can conclude, we can assert that the Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi who da'amar lefi she'ein b'kiyin lishma. Maybe we would say that the lishma concern of Rabbah aligns with Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Why? The Reb Shimon bar Abba, I see Gita lekame to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Reb Shimon bar Abba brought a get to the Bezdin, and Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was the person responsible for the get. And Reb Shimon, what was his name? Reb Shimon bar Abba says to Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, do we need to say b'fanai nechtam or do we not? Amar le lo tzrichas. You do not need to say b'fanai nechtam. Why not? Because says Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, lo amru ela bedoros harishonim she'ein b'kiyin lishma. The only reason why our Mishnah on Daf Beis ever recommended that we needed to say b'fanai nechtam is because the earlier generations were not b'kiyin and lishma. People did not know. It wasn't ubiquitous knowledge that you're supposed to use something lishma. Aval bedoros ha'achronim de b'kiyin lishma lo. The Gemara says that, but now everybody knows. So we have to talk history for a second. The Mishnayos were codified in the year 220. These are early Amoraim. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi probably knew Rebbe. I mean, maybe he just missed him. So when in history did we ever say b'fanai nechtam? I understand it's in the Mishnah on 220. That makes sense. But Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi was like a 2nd century Amora. Was it a 5-year period of b'fanai nechtam? If you look historically, this Gemara paints a picture of a very limited scope of when we would have ever said b'fanai nechtam. Says the Gemara, Tistayim. perhaps we can conclude that that is in fact the case, that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi is like Rabba, and Rabbi Yochanan is like Rava. Says the Gemara B'Tizbara, is it in fact the case? Is it reasonable to assume in this previous case that you don't have to say B'fanai nechtav u'B'fanai nechtam in the dialogue with Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi? Why would Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi say you don't have to say B'fanai nechtav u'B'fanai nechtam? Even if the case of Lishma was solved for, but what did we learn yesterday? V'harabba islay de Rava. But we said that Rabba is also concerned for Rava's opinion. So if Rabba, who's concerned with Lishma, is also concerned with Rava's opinion, and even if it's the case that in Medina Hayam, everybody now knows that it's Lishma, but that doesn't solve all the problems for Rabba. He should still be concerned about Rabba. And furthermore, we also said that even if they know everything that they're supposed to know in Chutz La'aretz and Medina Hayam about Get Lishma, but Ha'amrinan Shema Yachzor Davar L'Kil Kulo, perhaps people are going to forget in one generation, and it's not going to be Lishma anymore, and no one will know. So why is it that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi was so lenient to say that Bedoros Rishonim, they needed B'fanai nechtav, but now we've solved all of those problems? That's not true for two reasons. Again, Rabba holds like Rabba. We should still be concerned about fulfilling, about the capacity to prove a get, and also because people forget. So Ella says, the Gemara, you're right. This case was actually a little different than the way we presented it. Third of the way down, quarter of the way down on Hamid Beis, Reb Shimon bar Abba, Inish Achrina Haba Behadeh. Really, when Reb Shimon bar Abba came to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, it was two people presenting the Shaila, two shlichim. So therefore, the case was totally different. But there was another person, Inish Achrina Haba Behadeh, but Bahadelo Chashiv Le Mishum Kvoda de Reb Shimon. But because Reb Shimon was so chashuv, they didn't mention the second person, but there really were two people, and therefore there were no concerns of Rabbah. That's why Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said that we don't need to have B'fanai nechtav u'B'fanai nechtav. That brings us to the two dots about a third of the way down, Itmar. We have seen this elsewhere. We're going to see it again now. Bifnei kama nosnola. In front of how many people does she have to receive the get from the shliach? So this is a machlokes of Yochanan v'Reb Chanina. Chad amar bifnei shnayim, v'chad amar bifnei shlosha. Some say that there needs to be two witnesses to the shliach's transfer of the get to the isha, and some say it's three people. So the Gemara says, Tistayim, perhaps we can conclude the Rav Yochanan who da'amar bifnei shnayim. Rav Yochanan is of the opinion that we only need two witnesses. Why? The Ravin bar Rav Chizda, I see gita l'kamed to Rav Yochanan. Ravin bar Rav Chizda brought a get to Rav Yochanan. The Omar Le, he says to Rav Yochanan, and Rav Yochanan says to him, Zil havla be'ape trey, go give this get in front of two people. Very clearly, Rav Yochanan showing his feelings that you have to only present a get in front of two people. Ve'ema lehu, and they should say befanai nechtav befanai nechtav tistayim. We can therefore conclude that Rav Yochanan was of the opinion that it is only two people and not three. So says the Gemara, this machlokes of whether or not a get has to be given in front of two people or three people, lema b'ha kamiflage. Perhaps we can say that the machlokes is really on a deeper level. The machlokes of two or three witnesses is as follows, halfway down. Demanda amar bifnei shnayim, according to the Shita, who says, this was Rav Yochanan, who says that when a get is given by a shliach to a woman, we need two witnesses. So that's kasavar lefish ein v'kiyan lishma. We need regular edus that it was written lishma. Two edim is sufficient. However, umanda amar bifnei shlosha, according to the Shita who holds, and if it's not Rav Yochanan, it has to be the other Shita. It has to be the Shita of Reb Chanina, and he must hold kasavar lefish ein edim mitzuyin l'kaimo. Kiyum hashtar is done in a bezdin. That's better with three people. So therefore, maybe we should say that's what the machlokes is rooted in. Do we say that it's an issue of lishma, which is a din in edus, or do we say it's a din in mitzuyin l'kaimo, which is a din in bezdin, 2 verses 3? So the Gemara says v'tizbara, you cannot use this approach because then this sugya and the previous sugya would then be so serve one another. This is brilliant. How does this work out? Because in the case we said above, Hamid Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Amar Lefish Ein B'Kiyan Lishma, if it's true that earlier we said that Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi was of the opinion of Lishma, and his counterpart was Rabbi Yochanan, so Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lefish Ein Edim Mitzuyin L'Kaimo, yet over here you said that Rabbi Yochanan was not in the Edim Mitzuyin L'Kaimo camp, V'hacha, Heichi Kamar Rabbi Yochanan B'Fnei Shnayim, How can it be that Rabbi Yochanan could be soser himself? That doesn't work. The Odin, furthermore, Rabba Islay, the Rava. Rabba is also of the opinion. I'll take one of those, Dad. Thank you. Rabba's of the opinion. Two should work fine. I hope only one works. Rabba's of the opinion that he's also worried about Rava. So none of this really makes sense. Ella, therefore, the Gemara says 2/3 of the way down, the Kule Alma, really what's going on in this machlokas of 2 and 3, really everyone agrees that Ba'inan Eidim Mitsuyan Lakaima. Everyone agrees that we're concerned about verification of a get. You need to turn on your cup for just a moment. This is this Gemara is an important shasugya. The Gemara says, "V'hacha." What are we arguing about? B'shliach nasa eid, the eid nasa dayan kamiflage. It's role changes. Let's go through the picture. Reuven was married to Rachel. Things went sour. Couples therapy failed, getting a divorce. Reuven hires a sofer in France, and the get is written. They give it to Eliezer the shliach. Eliezer functions as a shliach. What is the role of a shliach? Shlucho shel adam kamoso. Every bris I do. Am I your shliach? Yes or no? Yes, you are. Congratulations. Now I'm literally an extension of that person. I facilitate his mitzvah. So Eliezer is a shliach. So what's the machlokes? Do we say that shliach nase'ed, that when the shliach shows up, he puts on a different cap and says, B'fanai nechtav u'b'fanai nechtam. He turns from a shliach to an aid. That works. But do we also then say the aid nasa dayan? Can the aid then become a dayan, a judge as well? He's saying B'fanai nechtav u'b'fanai nechtam as an aid, but can then he then be a dayan as well? And that's what the machlokes is about. And here is how we would understand this. Manda Omar Bifnei Shnayim, according to the Amora, who holds that a get has to be given in front of two people, he must hold Kasavar Shliach Nasa Eid ve'Eid Nasa Dayan. He says that there can be two role changes from Shliach to Eid and from Eid to Dayan, because the two Eidim that need to be there, plus the Shliach who's now converted into a Dayan, is three people to verify the get. That makes sense. Umanda Amar Bifnei Gimel. According to the opinion that we need three distinct aidim, not the shliach, he can't be an aid to verify the get. So kasavra must be that shliach nasa aid ve'ein aid nasa dayan, that the shliach can't convert into a dayan. Therefore, we need three separate ones. So therefore, we can understand the machlokes of whether or not we need 2 or 3 aidim to watch the transfer of the get from the shliach to the wife. If it's 2, it's because we hold that the shliach can become a dayan, and if it's 3, it's because the shliach cannot become a dayan. Kaftor raferach, says the Gemara. Not really. It's not really a good response, because a little bit more than 2/3 of the way down, the Gemara says, "Wait 1 second." We hold across the boards with no machlokas that b'derabanan, when we're dealing with dinei derabanan, de'ed naseh dayan. Everyone agrees. There's no machlokas 2 versus 3. Everyone agrees that aid nasa dayan. So therefore, we can't say that the difference between the shita that we require 2 aidim or 3 when the shliach gives a get to a wife, it cannot be based on the machlokas of shliach nasa aid ve'ed nasa dayan. Ella, says the Gemara, what really are we talking about? Hacha behaka miflage. We're talking about the mar savar kevan the isha ksheira lahaviyes get. Because a woman is ksheira to bring a get, zimnin demaisale itza v'samchiala. People might make a mistake and say this woman is a valid aid, and therefore to remove that concern, we require 3 aidim, and that way no one will ever make a mistake that a woman is a dayan. The idach, and the other opinion is not like that. The idach says isha meda yade velo samchiala. Everybody knows that a woman is not a dayan. This is a very modern piece of Gemara that we would ever have a havamina that a woman could be a dayan. There are times in halacha we trust women b'dinei kares. We trust a woman for hilchos nida. We don't have to see with our own 2 eyes that a nida goes to the mikvah. We trust her 100% b'inyanei kares. But a woman on a bezdin is never. That's completely unheard of. So it says the Gemara. That's actually the machlokas. And the Gemara says 3/4 of the way down, we actually have a little bit of clarity in Psak, Tanya Kava, said the Rabbi Yochanan. We have a brisa that's in line with the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan. How so? The brisa says, maybe get me Medina Sayam, but if a man from France gives a get to his wife through Shlichus, and he gives it to her in Yerushalayim, and he does not say the phrase that he should have said, and then she gets married, Yotzi v'havlad mamzer divrei Reb Meir. This is not good. This is really not good. So again, let's review our case. Reuven and Rachel are married. They decide to get a divorce. Reuven takes the apartment in France and sends a get to Yerushalayim. She receives the get. The shliach forgets to say b'fanei nechtam b'fanei nechtam. She says good riddance, and she marries another man and has a child. Rav Meir says that because the phrase b'fanei nechtam b'fanei nechtam wasn't said, those children born to the new marriage are mamzerim. It's a wild shita that Rav Meir would ever say such a thing. We'll question it shortly. The Chachamim Omrim, relax, ein havlad mamzer. No, the get is actually kosher. So says the Gemara, Keitzad Yaseh. What do the Chachamim then recommend in order to solve for this divorce? Says the Gemara, the kids are not mamzerim. Yidlenu heimena v'yachzer v'yidnenela b'fnei shnai v'yomer b'fanei nechtam b'fanei nechtam. Let's just check out. It's like a gerus misafek. Okay, let's do a gerushin misafek. Okay, take the get back, give it again with 2 eidim, say b'fanei nechtam b'fanei nechtam. Everything is done. Asks the Gemara, Rav Meir, mishum delo amar b'fanei nechtam b'fanei nechtam yosi ve'avlad mamzer. If she got married without that one phrase, the 4 words of b'fanei nechtam b'fanei nechtam, and she had a baby with a new husband, the kids are mamish mamzerim? Says the Gemara yes, according to Rav Meir, those kids are mamish mamzerim. She should not have gotten married. She should not have gotten pregnant. She should not have had kids, and the kids are mamzerim. Why? Rav Meir l'taimei. Damar of Hamnuna Mishmei Ula Omer Hay Rav Meir Kol HaMeshana Mimadbesh Tabu Chachamim Begittin Yotzi VeHavlad Mamzer. That anyone who deviates from the protocols put forth in order to create a get, the child is a mamzer. Extremely strict, a hardliner. Says the Gemara, 2 quick agaritas. Is it okay? The Gemara says as follows: 6-7 lines from the bottom. Barhedja Baili Isuye Gita. Barhedja wanted to take care of a get. Asa lekame de Rav Achi to have a memuna agite, and the get was brought to Rav Achi, who was an expert when it came to Gittin. Omar lei tzarich atalamod al kol os ve'os. You need to look over the get extremely carefully, every letter, make sure it's perfect. However, asa lekame de Ravasi, but Ravami Ravasi, they said no. Amre lei lo tzrichas. You really don't need to look at the whole get. And as we'll soon see, you really only need to see the top line of the get, that this husband and this wife want to get divorced. If you want to be frum and go against Ravami and Ravasi, who say you only need the top line, and now you want to say that I want to look at every line and be so frum, says the Gemara, that's not good. You could really mess over the image of that Bezdin. That image of Bezdin could be that if you find something in the later verses in the get that's problematic, then maybe you'll undo some of the high quality work that was done before. So no, Ravami and Ravasi say we only look at the top line, and you're not allowed to be frum and look at every other line. Says the Gemara, another story. Rabba Bar Chana Aisi Gita, he brought a get. Palga Ichtav Kameh, half of the get was written in front of him. Upalga Lo Ichtav Kameh, the second half wasn't written in front of him. And they brought it in front of Rabbi Lazar. As long as you've seen the first line written lishma, you are good to go. That get is 100% kosher. Rav Ashi Amar, even if you didn't see the get being written lishma, but listen to this, Vav Amar Aleph, afilu kan kulmusa v'kan megilta. You either hear the quill and or you hear the parchment, the scratching, the friction between the two, that's sufficient to know that it was written for the right reasons. And says the Gemara, Tanya Kavase de Ravashi, the Brisa says as follows: Hamevi get me Medina Sayam, the husband sends a get from France. Afilu hu beves babayis v'sofer be'aliyah. If I'm on the main floor of the house and the sofer is upstairs, or hu be'aliyah v'sofer babayis. Afilu nichnas v'yotze kol hayom kulo kosher. You're in and out the whole day, it's kosher. Says the Gemara, Hu be'bayis v'sofer be'aliyah. How can it be that if the husband is on the main floor of the house and the sofer who's writing the get is on another floor, how can it be that the get is lishma? Halocha chazilei. He didn't see anything happen. Elamai, it must be that Rav Ashi is right. Elalav kigon deshama kan kulmusa v'kan megilta. It must be that he heard the sound of the quill, or he heard the sound of the quill hitting the paper, and therefore that is considered lishma. Let's analyze just for a moment, and we'll stop at the two dots in a few lines. Amar Mar, what did we just say in this brisa? Afilu nichnas v'yotze kol hayom kulo kosher. So who's the person being nichnas? Who are we talking about? Man. Ilay mashliach, that makes no sense. Because hashta, if the shliach is huba bais v'sofer be'aliyah, dilo chazile, and their amr's kasher, nichnas v'yotze miboy. It can't be that we're talking about the shliach, because the shliach had an even bigger kula of never seeing it at all and being kosher. For sure, if he's nichnas v'yotze, it's going to be kosher. Ella, it must be that the person who was nichnas v'yotze was the sofer. Says the Gemara Pshita, that should be obvious. He's the person writing the star. What were we concerned about? Says the Gemara, no. Mishum de nichnas v'yotze nifselina. Just because the sofer has to take a lunch break, we're going to passel the get. That makes no sense. Says the Gemara, lo tzricha the nafak l'shuka ve'asa. The sofer went to town. He went to Target. He went wherever he went, and then he came back. What were we concerned about? Mahu de tema inishachrina ashkeche ve'amar le. Maybe when the sofer, went to town, somebody else asked him to make a get, and it was the same exact names of the get he was currently working on, but he was just on his lunch break. Kamash malan, we're not concerned about that. That's what this brisa is saying over here. So a very low standard of lishma, just the top line. And even if you don't see it yourself, just hearing the quill hitting the paper after you've made the request of her name and his name, that is still considered lishma. Yemir Hashem, over the next 2 days, both Monday and Tuesday, I'll be recording and posting. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
We have a plan for Shabbos. Yes.
Midnight.